The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Shadia Zaparov, President of the Kyrgyz Republic. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Madam President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished heads of delegations, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to sincerely congratulate Ms. Annalena Baerbock on her election as the President of the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly and to wish her every success in her work. This year, we mark the 80th anniversary of the UN, a unique institution that has stood guard over peace, security, and development for nearly a century. Over these 80 years, despite numerous conflicts, the world has fortunately been spared the outbreak of a third world war. The United Nations has undoubtedly played a key role in this achievement. The organization has become not only an international platform for dialogue, but also played a special role in preventing global conflicts. Today, the trend of regionalism in world politics is strengthening. We are witnessing continued price hikes, a shortage of liquidity, and a war of sanctions in the global economy. The threat of terrorism and extremism has spread across all countries. Despite criticism, the UN remains the only truly universal organization endowed with both moral authority and institutional capacity. Today, Kyrgyzstan takes pride in the political stability it has achieved and in the ongoing social and economic transformation. These achievements did not come easily to us. For us, the price of attaining freedom and independence was very high. But I can state one thing with confidence. We have been able to establish Kyrgyzstan as a state. This achievement allows us to set ambitious goals for the future. International organizations, including the UN, recognize Kyrgyzstan as one of the freest and most stable states on the Eurasian continent with a strong civil society. A large-scale and irreversible fight against corruption and crime is considered a priority area of state policy in Kyrgyzstan. Today, our task is to pursue political modernization and economic development in line with the demands of tomorrow. We are committed to improving the investment climate, building an information society, and establishing fair and transparent public governance. Ladies and gentlemen, every year in New York, leaders of all world's nations gather to once again remind themselves and each other of the great mission for which UN was created. I too have come to New York with this mission. Today, my diplomatic staff have prepared a polite text that takes into account the international diplomatic situation. However, this year, standing at this high podium, I decided not to speak as a diplomat. This year, from this podium, I wish to speak not only as the head of state, but as an ordinary person and a citizen of my country, openly expressing my true thoughts and reflections on the international events happening in the world. This year marks the 4th time I am delivering a speech at the UN General Assembly. For 3 consecutive years, I came here and delivered pleasant, beautiful words. But today, I have decided to speak openly and directly about the problems that trouble the hearts of millions of people. In different parts of the world, in Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, new armed conflicts and wars are erupting. Millions of people losing their homes are forced to abandon their native lands, and millions become victims. Who suffers the most? First and foremost, ordinary people. We cannot turn a blind eye to the suffering of many peoples, Palestine, Ukraine, Sudan, Syria, and others where hostilities continue. Civilians are dying and human rights are being violated. The world community, applying double standards, prioritizes these conflicts as more or less important, depending on its own geopolitical interests. The conflict in Ukraine has lasted nearly 4 years, with people continuing to die and flee their country. We support the efforts of US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin to seek solutions for a peaceful settlement of conflict in Ukraine. We are interested in this outcome because we too are suffering from the consequences of Russian-Ukraine conflict. Unilateral sanctions negatively affect us as well, a country that is only just getting back on its feet. Kyrgyzstan is making every effort to strengthen its economy independently. Therefore, we view unjustified sanctions as interference in our internal affairs and as pressure that hinders the development of our still-forming economy. I have always said, I will say again, Kyrgyzstan has strictly fulfilled and will continue to fulfill its international obligations. However, we cannot sacrifice the interests of our citizens and the economic development of our country. The sanctions imposed on Kyrgyzstan are based on false information spread by certain non-governmental organizations and dishonest people. We are ready to accept independent international audits to thoroughly review the activities of Kyrgyzstan's banks. In 2024, EU countries traded with Russia to the amount of $141 billion, of which $36 billion was Russian imports. and the UK, which imposed sanctions on 2 of our banks the same year, traded with Russia for $2.2 billion. Frankly speaking, some keep the option of cooperating with Russia in defense of their own interest, but forbid others from doing the same. How should this phenomenon be called? Before demanding something from others, be an example to yourself. You demand from us not to cooperate with Russia, yet you yourselves are cooperating extensively. We, in fact, have far deeper economic relations with Russia than you do. Therefore, economically speaking, we cannot refuse cooperation with Russia. We do not seek confrontation with others. We cooperate with virtually the entire world, pursuing a multi-vector foreign policy. For example, every year we sell gold worth of $1 billion to the UK alone. My foremost duty as the president of the country is to ensure the security of my citizens and my nation, and to improve their economic well-being. We oppose the politicization of economic cooperation and trade. Therefore, we demand the lifting of sanctions against 2 of our banks. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the UN Secretary General has already described the Gaza Strip as a graveyard of thousands of children. More is needed to stop the war and the horrific events in Gaza. We must empathize with Palestinian people who have suffered enormous losses as a result of inhuman conflict in the Gaza Strip. We must not remain indifferent to the human tragedy unfolding before the whole world. We demand an end to genocide against the Palestinians and the commencement of international judicial investigation by the UN International Court of Justice. My country has always firmly condemned violence and terrorism in all their forms, including the terrorist attacks on Israel on the 7th of October, 2023. Such terrorists must be punished harshly. However, the fight against terrorism and the methods used to eliminate terrorists have their own rules and procedures. Those methods must be used. Because of actions of such terrorists, millions of ordinary civilians should not perish. Why do we allow the mass deaths of ordinary people and innocent children by the hundreds of thousands? The only way to establish a lasting peace is to implement the principle of two states for two people. Palestine must gain independence based on 1967 borders. We also condemn the recent rocket strikes on the territories of Qatar and Iran, since such attacks infringe on the sovereignty of independent states, create threats to regional stability and security, and run counter to the norms of international law. The fight against terrorism and modern threats in Gaza, Iran, Lebanon, and other regions must be proportionate to their scale and nature. Civilians, women, and children must not suffer and be sacrificed. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as a neighboring country, Kyrgyzstan considers it important, especially in these difficult times, to provide comprehensive support to the Afghan people by integrating Afghanistan's economy into the regional and global economic processes. To isolate Afghanistan at the international level and deprive it of foreign assistance is wrong. It is unjust. We believe that the use of financial instruments for geopolitical and ideological gain, thereby deepening the humanitarian crisis, is an act of injustice and inhumanity. Therefore, we are convinced that the assets of Afghanistan frozen by Western countries in the amount of $9 billion must be returned to the Afghan people as soon as possible. These funds could contribute to the restoration of infrastructure, expansion of access to credit through local banks, the development of agriculture, and the creation of new opportunities for millions of people living in poverty. According to the UN data, in 2025, 15 million people in Afghanistan faced hunger and 24 million required humanitarian assistance. As we all know, at the beginning of September, more than 2,000 of our Afghan brothers lost their lives as a result of an earthquake. Tragically, due to lack of financial resources and weak infrastructure, timely assistance could not be provided to those affected. We call upon the leaders of Western countries to immediately return these assets for the sake of future of the Afghan people. If you truly want the Afghan people to overcome poverty, hunger, as soon as possible, return them without delay. Only then will your words about human rights and interstate obligations correspond to your actions. Distinguished participants, today's challenges in African countries, from conflicts to food insecurity, require not sympathy in words, but solidarity in action. Africa is 54 countries with a population of more than 1.5 billion people. It is the second largest continent after Eurasia. Africa possesses enormous reserves of resources, and we are confident that in the near future Africa's role in the global economy and international politics will multiply several times. Therefore, the continent's colossal natural wealth must serve the accelerated development of Africa itself and the fulfillment of its own interests. The peacekeeping work of the UN must be strengthened. My country began sending its peacekeepers on UN missions at the dawn of its independence in the early 1990s. This once again proves that we are sincerely wish to contribute to the cause of strengthening peace and security in the world. The contribution of a state should not be determined by its size, but by the depth of its commitment and sincere desire for peace and solidarity. We support the strengthening of international treaties, including the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. It is important to educate the younger generation to perceive a world without nuclear weapons. It is essential to raise awareness among young people about the devastating consequences of weapons of mass destruction. The International Day for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation Awareness, initiated by Kyrgyzstan and supported by the UN member states, is an excellent platform for implementing this concept. Kyrgyzstan is one of the initiators and the depository of Treaty on Nuclear Weapon-Free Zones in Central Asia. We have acceded to all fundamental international instruments on disarmament and non-proliferation, including the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. In line with the principles of consistency, this year the Kyrgyz Republic made the political decision to sign the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We firmly believe that our planet must exist without nuclear weapons. This human invention must be used solely for peaceful purposes. Ladies and gentlemen, for sustainable development and regional integration, the countries of Central Asia require equal dialogue and active cooperation. Despite complex historical and geographic factors, Kyrgyzstan has peacefully resolved its border issues with neighboring countries, in particular Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. This process involved lengthy negotiations and at high political levels, expert levels, and was resolved with due respect for the interests of all sides. I can state with confidence that today the borders between Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan are borders of friendship, trade, and cooperation. This experience confirms that peace is possible where there is political will, respect, and dialogue, which enabled us to resolve existing contradictions and embark on a path of creation and development. Kyrgyzstan is ready to share this experience of resolving complex issues with the international community. Let us use the more than $3 trillion that are spent annually on armaments worldwide to improve people's lives, eradicate hunger, protect our environment, and clean the air. After all, there are no borders when it comes to breathing air. We all breathe the same air. Therefore, I call on us to live not in a race for who has the most powerful weapons, but in a competition for whose country has the cleanest nature and air. Dear friends, climate change is a reality we are witnessing today. We face threats of drought, melting glaciers, changes in ecosystems, and loss of biodiversity. Kyrgyzstan, as a mountainous country, is particularly vulnerable to these changes. We are already experiencing the threat of declining water resources and risks to agriculture and biodiversity. Although Kyrgyzstan is landlocked, it actively participates in international environmental initiatives and can play a significant role in supporting agreements aimed at protecting global ecosystems. The Kyrgyz Republic consistently advocates for recognition of the interconnection of natural systems from mountains to oceans, which are two poles of a single system. The future of the oceans begin on the mountaintops. In this context, we ratified the agreement on conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity and became among the first 60+ countries to join the agreement. Rivers that sustain marine and coastal ecosystems originate in mountains. Thus, the protection of mountain ecosystems and the sustainable management of the oceans are interconnected. At present, the country is preparing the second Bishkek Plus 25 summit, scheduled for 2027, as a central platform for states, international organizations, and experts on sustainable development of mountain regions. We invite all of you to take an active part in this event. Dear friends, as former UN General Secretary Dag Hammarskjöld once aptly said, the UN was not created to lead humanity to heaven, but to save humanity from hell. Today these words are more relevant than ever. The organization was born from the horrors of war, but lives and on thanks to faith in cooperation, dialogue and respect. Now more than ever, it is important to preserve and strengthen the system of multilateralism as a shield against anarchy and unilateral decisions. There is an urgent need to develop fundamentally new international mechanisms that adequately respond to contemporary challenges and threats. Our organization needs to change. This is no longer a choice, but a requirement of time and today's realities. In this context, we support the effort of the Secretary General to reform the UN under the initiative UN 80. It is also time to improve the reform work of the UN Security Council. At present, 50 members of the Security Council effectively decide the fate of all world's states. Questions of war and peace, security and stability depend on whether they can reach a consolidated position. Moreover, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council can always block any decision. Kyrgyzstan advocates for a necessary measure to improve the UN Security Council in a way that takes into account the interests of majority of states. In this regard, it is important to achieve a compromise on all aspects of Security Council reform as soon as possible. This reform must be based on principles of universality, broad geographical representation, and wide support among UN member states. Kyrgyzstan considers it legitimate and fair to expand the rights of African states to membership in the Security Council and to eliminate historical imbalances. More than 60 member states, including Kyrgyzstan, have never been elected to the Security Council, while some countries have been elected 5 or 6 times. We think it's not fair. Distinguished delegates, Kyrgyzstan strives to make its contribution to peace, global security, and sustainable development. In order to draw the attention of the UN and the world to the challenges faced by small states, Kyrgyzstan has put forward its candidacy for non-permanent membership in the UN Security Council for the period 2027-2028. The support of countries that have never been elected to this Security Council will strengthen confidence in equality among members and thereby raise the authority of organization and reinforce trust in it. We sincerely believe in the principle of justice, and I ask UN member states to support us in the elections in June next year. Every country should have the opportunity to serve as a member of the Council and contribute to the cause of maintaining peace and security. I can confidently say that Kyrgyzstan is among those states with the experience needed to raise meaningful issues in the Security Council. We will firmly uphold international law, justice, the protection of human rights, and support the multilateral system based on mutual respect, balance of interest, and responsibility to future generations. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our challenges are shared, and our responses must be united. Our words must match our deeds. We cannot afford inaction. Peace requires effort. The future of our planet is in our shared responsibility. Thank you very much for your attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Kyrgyz Republic.